How can you turn a huge failure into something successful? Everybody, this is Alessandro, and today I want to talk about it. Go back basically at the origin of my career, right? When I was still studying animation to the animation, and explain how big was of a failure and a disappointment for me, but how I managed to transfer those skills into something very successful career-wise, animation-wise, of course, for me today. All right. So I don't know if you probably see some of my oldest video on my channel back then when I was really still a teen, like in 11, 12 years old. I was really into, Japanese animation, Japanese manga. I was reading them a lot, watching them a lot, but most of all, I was drawing at all, right? Like, so I was so in love with the appeal of their design, of the beauty of the drawing, that I was basically spending every afternoon drawing. I remember I was pausing a movie to watch them frame by frame, and I was trying to copy their framing. I was reading a lot of manga, and I was opening those pages and trying to copy those poses, understand how anatomy works. I never have the traditional, study anatomy first from like a live figure drawing, because I was just really obsessed with anime and manga, right? And basically, I was doing this all the time. Even when I remember when I was going at school, I was never really good at studying, guys. So during the lesson, like, my other friends were distracted and everything, but I was just drawing even at school, right? Then I go back at home, I continue to draw. I started to do my own comic book. Nothing really original or anything, because basically it was a ugly copy of Dragon Ball and probably a mixture with any other comic. But again, I was enjoying it. I enjoyed the feeling of creating a story, designing my own character, and I love doing all those panel with the camera angle and stuff like that, doing the fighting sequence. So I was really enjoying it. I love it, right? I was really in love with this. And so obviously, guys, as you can imagine, when I was still really young, in 13, 14, my dream was working as a 2D animator in Japan. That was like my top dream, right? Like I said, I really want to go to live in Japan, to be like to the animator, blah blah blah. Doing a manga would be like also lovely, but like my real big dream was to become a 2D animator, right? So what happened after high school? Basically, I took a 2D animation school in Italy, right? And I did it for 3 years. Bottom line, guys, realistically speaking, even though I have a lot of passion, I was drawing basically every day since I was 11 or 12 years old. My skill was not good enough to have a job as a 2D animator. Neither in Italy, forget about it, Japan, when you have all the master 2D animator. And you can imagine the sadness, the disappointment. I don't know if I really went into depression, because like I never went to a doctor or anything to ask, but definitely I was really devastated about this, because after a while I realized, after so long, that my drawing skill were not that good, my animation wasn't that good as a 2D animator. And so yes, it was like a huge failure, because guys, you can imagine, for 10 years, since I was 12 until I was 21, 22, constantly drawing, studying, making a lot of sacrifice. Like, all my friends were going out, drinking, everything. I was always, well, not always, but most of the time I was drawing at school, not at school, drawing at home, and study, to basically come up at the end of it, realizing, I'm not meant to be something like this, right? So very devastating. This is, I would say, the biggest failure I always encounter. On top of that, I studied to a school for 3 years. They cost money, a lot of money, and at the end you have no job, right? That, imagine the disappointment, right? So after that, obviously, slowly I started to transition to 3D, but when I started to do 3D animation, was still at the very beginning, right? I remember the first Pixar movie come out, Toy Story, and realistically, guys, 3D at the very beginning, 3D animation didn't look that good. I was comparing it with 2D animation, with the beauty of the drawing. So for me, it was like, I was really disappointed. This is like a B, a C plan or something. Like, I'm not good enough to be a traditional artist. I have to now turn over to this one and just move a 3D puppet. Something doesn't even look very appealing. I didn't really enjoy it, right? But I still do it, because at the end I feel like, okay, maybe now I can follow my second passion, which is video game, which is something I always love, of course, and I can do something like that. I can still have fun, maybe do games, blah blah blah. And so I focus on 3D animation now. And yes, at the beginning, I'll tell you honestly, guys, I didn't really like it that much because I felt like I was just moving character, like not really crafting the poses, the composition, or stuff like that. I didn't really know 3D very well. But more and more I spent the time doing 3D, and at some point I wanted to get better, and better movie started to come out, guys, and I go back to analyze those movie frame by frame, right? So I started to watch Toy Story, The Incredible, Moana, really like frame by frame, studying all those poses, and then I was like, hey, like those poses are very appealing. Like in 3D now, you can do very beautiful things. You can have great line of action, contrast, the eyes look very, very expressive. The animation doesn't look floaty anymore. It has weight. It feels dynamic. Even the way they move the cloth, it's so beautiful. Kind of resemble to the animation. And then when I started to go frame by frame, I also realized that every single frame is kind of crafted, right? You can see every pose is well designed. Me at the beginning, when I was trying to do 3D, and this is I think like a lot of mistake that people do, they do few key poses, and then the in between, yes, maybe they do the easy in, easy out, but the poses are not really well crafted. Sometimes you can see frame by frame, the poses, the in between poses are not very appealing, the finger are not well done, the facial is not well designed, and people feel like, oh, who cares, because the character moves really quickly, so you don't really see the difference, right? But I think it's wrong, because when you do an animation that's really well polished and every frame is well done, it makes actually a lot of difference, right? So I go back to study this, and I started to again fall in love again with animation. I realized that now with the 3D, you could achieve that, right? In fact, actually, there started to be a lot of 3D animation with cel shading and everything, that kind of mimicking to the animation. Now, I would say the very first attempt back here, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, not very successful, but again with time, especially some Japanese studio took it to the next level, right? And they start to have this really camera composition, strong staging, that they really start to resemble the 2D animation that I used to love with, right? And so back then the problem was that, at the beginning when I was trying to do it by myself, I was just trying to copy. I couldn't really achieve that, and so basically at some point I started to go back to the point where, what, I used to draw comics, do the camera and everything. Why don't you let me go back on paper and draw the composition, draw the camera framing, the perspective, draw the character how I have it in my mind, put it on paper with a strong line of action, maybe the hands in front of the camera, the character kind of behind like this, I wanted this kind of dynamic poses, draw the way I think it looks good, and then try to match them in 3D. And so then I was forced to do this. I was always do the storyboard first on paper and really nail the details of the composition, the posing, the silhouette, the anatomy, and then try my best to pose those characters, right? Obviously, guys, along the way, I had mentorship. I went to another online school. I have a private mentor who teach me what to do, how to make those poses really shine. But one of the things that I decided, it was always easy for me, because of my background from my failure, guys, was always easy for me to conceptualize the poses on paper, right? Analyze what I want, do some quick sketch, and now quickly started to pose it in 3D and really push them really until I matched the 3D poses, the 3D composition with have in mind on the 2D paper, right? And at the beginning, I didn't really understand the potential, because at some point, yes, I was able to get the result that I want, right? And I started to have better key poses, better key moment. But again, sometimes I also fell in the trap at the beginning of when I was doing the in between. Maybe I do one of the major breakdown and some other, them not that nice. And then, with the proper mentorship and everything, I started to realize that you need to pay attention to every single details, right? It's like if you have the hands here, then you move like this, maybe you started to stretch, you go here, right? And so you want to put all those details. You don't want to look at random movement like this when your hands is all stiff, the arc is all broken, right? You really want to nail down frame by frame. And then the next step that I started to do is that when I was struggling to, maybe have the right key poses and everything, but the motion was not that convincing, what I started to do was say, let me draw over in my frame by frame in order to really craft those poses and do them really want the way I think it looks right. Look, I always have this philosophy, right? When I do in 3D and I think the poses is not looking really good, all right, I always go back and ask myself, okay, Alessandro, if you have to draw this frame on paper, how would you draw it? Would you draw it like this, where your character is all like this, all messy, or will you do a nice, line of action with the shoulder, with the hands like this, posing the finger? And I would do exactly this. Like I say, okay, this frame doesn't look good. How would I draw this? If I have to draw a still image and make it look good, because that's the thing, guys, when you draw on paper, it's not emotional. It's a still image that people can go there and observe for a minute. So you better do it good, right? Because people will observe it for a while, right? So you cannot say, oh, it's emotion if it looks ugly. Who cares? No, it's on a piece of paper. When you do the head staging, you want to tilt it properly, you do the right facial expression, you do the finger nicely, you group them together. And again, I was doing this one, but not just on the main key poses. I was doing it frame by frame. And because I started to get into this loop, now I became a lot more efficient and faster. Okay, guys? And so bottom line, many years later, I started to implement this more and more. It became a habit and became very successful. And again, now we arrive to the point where in my career, I'm extremely good in posing. And I can see this, I can see with my students when they struggle to make original poses. I ask them to do it. They even sometimes when they choose the reference from online, they have no concept of what is something appealing, right? They struggle to tell a story with the poses. I look at their poses, I don't understand what they're trying to communicate. But it also happens with people at work. Sometimes when I work with my colleague right now or in the past, I can see that their poses are not that appealing. They look like the very disjointed, non-anatomically correct, or maybe just not that interesting. They're not very dynamic. They look kind of bland. And for me, it's like, I came to the point now where I'm very quick. I see these poses, very quickly my brain is like, okay, this is not good. It should be this. I try compose it, and this looks a lot nicer. Okay, this composition is not good. Bring the character closer, have some contrast. But I can come up with those ideas most of the time very, very quickly. And this is something I notice is it gives me a huge edge in my skill, right? And I can see a lot of people really struggle. And so this is giving me an edge when I was an animator, because I was able to animate and execute a lot faster with great key poses and great storytelling moment, right? To be able also to not only animation, be also to adjust or sometimes do the camera by myself very quickly, because it happens in production that sometimes we receive a storyboard or a layout, then we go into animation and there is something that is not working, and me as an animator, I was able to recreate, to re-handle the camera by myself, because now I had that experience, right? When I was young, I was again doing comics, so it means camera staging as well. I did it for many years, so now for me it was kind of a second nature, where I can see most of animators have no clue about camera. They struggle making like a very good poses, right? And this gives me a great edge, and I do believe really contribute to make my career definitely more successful in general, because again, it's not just about the polish of animation and everything, but again, I can come up with those ideas or I can execute them very, very quickly because of this. When other people really struggle, they try different poses, none of them looks good, they need to spend a lot of time. For me, I do it like this, right? And so I think this is like a great advantage for me. It really helped me a lot in my career, especially lately, where I'm doing more of a supervisor role, so I need to give feedback to other people, especially even when I was in Ubisoft or stuff like that. So it really helped me a lot. And at the beginning, guys, when I failed as a 2D animator, when I failed as I wanted to become a comic book artist, I could never imagine at the beginning, when I started to start 3D again, I could never imagine those skills all the time would pay off eventually, right? And this is of course also only because at the end my job is still very similar. It's not like a completely changed career, right? So again, it kind of pay off, but it was a surprise at the beginning, because at the beginning I didn't realize it, but at the end it really helped a lot, and it contributed a lot with my career today, and it makes me more happy in general, because at least I felt like that all those years back then, they were not wasted, right? And so all the time spent in crafting, stuff like that, It was good, and it's still something once in a while I do it because I always love to continue to practice and everything. So once in a while I go and study 3D animation. I go still to read comics once in a while because I do believe there is always way to improve and get better and be inspired by better artists basically. Okay guys, I hope you enjoy for today and see you next time. Ciao.